sure I got my screen. Hold on 1 second. Let me open this. I'm a little bit parched. And just give me 1 second. All right. Yeah, I wanted to take a sip off camera. I don't want to be advertising for any corporations. So I was like, let me hurry up and open it, pour it into a cup. And for the audience, I first want to apologize for those who catch this a little bit later. Getting off work didn't get off as quickly as I'd hoped to, and so kind of just said, all right, I know it's set for a certain time, but told Carl a certain time. It's all kind of miscommunications, but we're having this conversation. So whether you catch it with us live or whether you catch it later on, or if Carl decides to segment a couple of portions and then upload it on his channel, I hope you guys catch this chat, and I hope it is entertaining, informational, all those things above. So first and foremost, I want to say, this is what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage, a conversation with Carl Zha, part 3. This is going to be a brief one, but don't worry, Carl will be back on more and more conversations. So how are we doing this morning over there with you, Carl?
Yeah, now it's 10 o'clock in the morning in beautiful Ubud, Bali. Our family decided to take a little staycation on the island, so we're just exploring this part of this beautiful island right now.
And it is a beautiful island from all the pictures I see. Shout out to Liz out there. How are we doing, sweetie? I see Steven Torres is out here. He says, I hope this doesn't get misconstrued as harassment. I may be the most polite harasser in the world, like trolling, valid critiques, never resorted to name calling. Okay. Well, I'll get this question out of the way because Steven is one of the people who asked this question. Because, of course, I definitely want to talk mainly about the Pelosi and China and things like that. But Stephen and a couple other people were kind of curious about your position on TPP. How do you feel TPP has affected China, the positives, the negatives? I mean, it's everything.
Okay.
Okay.
So first, I want to just put out some facts out there about TPP. So TPP stands for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which originally was an idea put forth by the Obama administration. This was under Hillary Clinton's Pivot to Asia framework. So TPP is going to include all the Pacific Rim nations into a free trade zone. When I say all Pacific Rim nations, but with one big glaring exception. The exception is China, because TPP was designed by the Obama administration to exclude China. You will be a free trade zone with everybody else but China. So what happened was Trump administration killed TPP for good. So United States is not is not part of TPP. And then what happened is the rest of the nation that was lined up by the U.S. to form the TPP partnership, they got kind of left hanging, and so they said, okay, let's do one with just without U.S. So they call it the CTPP now. It's basically it's the same thing, but no United States. And it's right around like a couple of years ago, China said, hey, we heard about this partnership. We would like to join the party. And so China is an applicant. China is not an accepted member yet. So China has sending their application It's been under review. So if China does join the CTPP, that will be like it's really be ironic, because TPP was originally designed to exclude China. And if China managed to get in, now it's just everybody else but United States.
So, and especially right now with the climate that's going on, I can't see that the United States would enter in the partnership with China. In fact, I feel like any of the partnerships that they might have going on right now would be a lot of those things on hold. especially with some of the sanctions that's been put forward, and and some of the tone towards like Nancy Pelosi's recent visit. And so,
Yeah.
and I also think that like right now, we should probably expect for at least economic war between China and the U.S. in the near future.
I agree because United States was pushing really hard for globalization back in the 90s and
Yeah.
2000s because that benefited United States. You know,
Hmm.
US multinationals were reaping most of the benefits of that round of globalization. Now it's at the point where US multinationals, they felt pressure by competition from China. So they actually want to build up barriers, trade barriers, rather than tear them down. So we're U.S. is in no mood to join TPP at any foreseeable future. And I don't know China will actually get in because again the TPP originally was designed to exclude China, so it all depends on other member nations whether they're gonna accept China's application or not. So all right now it's all speculation, all hypothetical, because China is not a member of the CTPP. Like it's just sending an application. Everything is up in air. We know. We just know U.S. probably not going to join that process anytime soon because it's domestic reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Definitely, it's not going to be anything, especially right now with all this stuff going on. That's the reason why more of my focus tends to be kind of on what's going on with all of these other issues that are going to happen as far as ramifications of nuclear war and possibilities of nuclear war and things like that, or just war in general. The whole China Taiwan thing, I feel, is a lot more of a pressing issue right now. And like, so what are your thoughts on the whole Pelosi visit and like a lot of the different things that have been going on as far as the war games and also that's right, we haven't talked since the assassination of Shinzo Abe, and so how all of these things all work together in this whole narrative.
It's a good point. Shinzo Abe, of course, is a right wing Japanese politician. But I remember someone said on Twitter says, you think Shinzo Abe is bad. You should see the alternatives.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's where Japan is right now politically. Like we're getting rid of one right wing politician. The replacement just worse. And especially Japan is also on a similar trajectory as US. Like the economy is moribund, the youth doesn't have much future aspect, so the politician is kind of ramping up tensions, geopolitical tensions, to get votes. And because to do that, they don't actually have to do anything to actually build the country to improve the economy. They just says
Mhm.
we're here to defend our country. You can't argue with that. So that's Japan. But Pelosi, first of all, a lot of the rhetorics in U.S. about the Pelosi visit is just reminds me of like 1984. The war is peace. It's everything is inverted because the White House spokesperson Kirby has said, China is overreacting to this long-standing U.S. policy of having diplomatic relation with Taiwan, which is completely untrue because
Mhm.
the last time a Speaker of the House visited Taiwan was in 1997. That was 25 years ago. That was Newt Gingrich, and and again, this is a big deal because Nancy Pelosi is a second in line to succeed as a U.S. president, just in case something happened. If something happened to both Biden and Kamala Harris on the same day, then
Mhm.
Pelosi will be our president.
Yeah,
And she did
definitely.
and she did not flew on either a private jet or commercial airline like the
Yeah, she
past
flew on
U.S.
a military transport on an Air Force plane.
Yes, she flew on the U.S. Air Force C-40C. It's. I mean, it's this. She went in first as in her capacity as a Speaker of the House. Third highest ranking member of the administration, and then she went on the U.S. Air Force jet. And in whatever, however you cut it, that is a violation of the Chinese sovereignty, because the U.S. China relationship today, the basis for that was 1972 Shanghai Communique, when Nixon went over and he met with the Chinese premier Zhou Enlai in Shanghai. They signed a joint communique, it's called Shanghai Communique, which it says United States recognize the Taiwan issue is an issue remain to be resolved by Chinese people on the both side of the Taiwan Strait. Otherwise, in other words, U.S. recognize Taiwan issue is a leftover from the Chinese Civil War. It's an issue for the Chinese themselves to resolve peacefully among themselves. It's not something that U.S. would interfere. So with that guarantee, that formed the basis for the future Sino-American relationship. And then in 1979, U.S.-China normalized relationship. The U.S. moved its embassy out of Taipei, move its embassy to Beijing. So because for people have to realize, the Taiwan issue is really a holdover from the Chinese Civil War. In 1950, Taiwan itself, it was part of China until 1895 when Japan defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War. And so Japan, then Taiwan became a Japanese colony for 50 years until end of World War II. And as part of the World War II settlement, Japan is supposed to give up all its former colonies, including Taiwan. So Taiwan was returned to China after August 1945. But what happened in China was after the Japanese surrender, the civil war broke out between the communists and the KMT government, and eventually the communists won. And the KMT government under Chiang Kai-shek, they fled to Taiwan. And then in 1950, when Mao was about to send the People's Liberation Army to cross the Taiwan Strait and to finally liberate Taiwan, in June 1950, the Korean War broke out. And Truman decided to unilaterally send the U.S. 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait, which effectively prevented the People's Liberation Army from crossover, because in 1950, China, People's Republic of China didn't have a navy or air force. There's nothing they could do when U.S. aircraft carriers sail into the Taiwan Strait in 1950. So this actually predated Chinese intervention in the Korean War. The U.S. took an action to interfere in the Chinese Civil War, and that led to later Mao sending the troops he would otherwise only send to Taiwan and send them to Korea instead to fight the Americans. So this was the history. And then for about 20 years after that, U.S. worked under this fiction that somehow Chiang Kai-shek's government on Taiwan represent the whole China. And Chiang Kai-shek still held the China's UN seat for 20 years until Nixon visit to China. So Nixon visit to China was really the pivot. And that's when U.S. changed its policy, switched recognition to Beijing. And in on the State Department website, they have a whole history of whole page on the Sino-American relationship for the last 100 years. And there's an entry for 1978. It says both sides agreed to normalize relationship, and United States recognize, confirm that Taiwan is part of China. So that is like the precondition for the two sides to have a diplomatic tie like we have today. And what U.S. have done in the past few years is starting to walk back from that position. It started with, so first of all, right in 1970s, there was already, in 1950s, there were already two Taiwan Strait crises in 1954 and 1958. During both those crises, that when it looks like Mao's People's Liberation Army was about to seize a couple offshore islands, not even Taiwan, just offshore islands, few kilometers off the mainland coast, U.S. Pentagon had plans to drop nuclear bombs on mainland China to stop.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yes, this only came out a couple of years ago. The plan, but the plan didn't get carried out because in the end, Mao did not send the PLA over, but Even so, since 1958, U.S. has stationed nuclear weapons and nuclear-tipped missiles in Taiwan, pointed
Mm-hmm.
at mainland China. U.S. stationed 30,000 troops in Taiwan, and during Vietnam War, Taiwan basically became like a little playground for U.S. Soldiers from Vietnam on R&R. Over 60,000 U.S. servicemen rotated through Taiwan. This only changed in 1972 after Nixon visited China. So U.S. pull out its military from Taiwan. It's pull out its nukes, pull out its nuclear missiles, and what has happened since Hillary Clinton's pivot to Asia in 2012 is U.S. is now trying to slowly walk back from that position.
Mm-hmm.
They're aside from like keep on selling billions of dollars worth of weapons to Taiwan. Many U.S. congressmen visit, but never Speaker of the House, and there has
Yeah,
been no
it's
Speaker
been
of the House.
25 years, yeah,
Yeah,
since it was Newt
and
Gingrich was the last one.
under Trump administration, U.S. for the first time since 1970s sent U.S. Marines to Taiwan under the pretense that the U.S. Institute on Taiwan, which serve as a de facto embassy, because there's no official embassy because U.S. don't recognize Taiwan, so they
Yeah.
have this.
Well,
So
technically, officially they do, but in practice they don't because they still recognize. I'm talking about China, the one China policy. So they recognize it as all being China,
right,
but they act as if it's different. Oh, I guess I'm sorry. I guess I was misunderstanding. I wanted to throw something out to the chat real
yeah,
quick
so
too. I've already asked Carl about TPP, and you can look in Google. TPP is no longer policy, and he's already talked about that China has applied for the the TT investment thing. So he's answered that question. So let's go on. But I was wondering something about because I've read this, and this has been a theory of mine. Part of the Pelosi visit is about the semiconductors. What do you say about that aspect of that's part of why
um,
her visit?
yeah, so interesting because this is more important to United States than it is to China, because China is fine buying semiconductors from Taiwan. It has done so for past several decades, because Taiwan semiconductors produce like the majority of the world's supply of semiconductor chips, um, especially the more cutting edge 7 nanometer and this and less. I think that they recently came out with 5 nanometer uh, chips in TSMC in Taiwan. So for United States, the supply of semiconductors from Taiwan is very important. What U.S. has done in the last few years is they are trying to bring back the semiconductor production back to United States. What they did is they forced the TSMC to essentially divulge their trade secret, and then offer to have TSMC open a plant, I think in Arizona, to start manufacturing semiconductor in US. So that way, in case that Taiwan gets reunified with mainland China, US will have its semiconductors onshore in US. So that's part of the US plan. And Nancy Pelosi herself, let's keep in mind she and her husband, we all know about her stock manipulation, but they also
Mm-hmm.
invested heavily in the same semiconductor industry.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
and
Paul Pelosi, part of them getting in trouble a few months back. I'm trying. I can't remember the name of the company. My friend buddy Franco covered it, and I can't remember the name of it for now. It starts with an N, but they got in
and
trouble for those stock tips.
And for Pelosi herself, what a better way to distract the public from looking further into their stock manipulation than carrying out this highly provocative trip that could potentially trigger World War III. When
Yeah,
everybody's worrying about World War III, they don't worry about Nancy Pelosi and her husband's stock manipulation anymore. They forget about the insider trading part. So in a way, this Nancy Pelosi's visit again, it's just symbolic. It's symbolic visit. Does it actually do anything either for Taiwan or
I
for
honestly
US?
think that it's for provocation.
Oh
Um,
no, totally. I mean,
I think
but
it's intentionally because they're fighting over the semiconductor market, and the U.S. know that they can't build their own semiconductors because they don't have
but
all the raw materials, so they want to capitalize on the area which is producing most of it.
well, Nancy Pelosi's stated reason is to offer support to Taiwan. But
Hmm.
realistically, what kind of support did she offer to Taiwan other than this like very just highly symbolic photo ops? I mean, like Taiwan's position vis-a-vis China did not change just because of Pelosi visit. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, after Pelosi left, China carried out a military exercise all around the Taiwan island, and U.S. didn't do peep about that.
Well,
So in that,
and this has been going on back to when Australia was complaining and wanting to do more because they were worried about China in the region.
so again, like what Pelosi has done by her visit, it's all symbolic. It's a chance for her to raise her own personal profile, and it's also close to U.S. midterms, right? So she's probably thinking about her own donors, Democratic donors who are trying to get, and I think also Democrats are under this kind of mistaken notion that somehow they can out hawk the Republicans, so they can get a slice of the hawkish base, a voter base. Um, I I I don't see that their strategy going to succeed.
I would honestly kind of say that this isn't even so much Pelosi. I would say this is more Biden because Biden has always been more of a hawkish type mentality, and he can't outright do it himself because that would have been really egregious. And so he decides, oh, let me send Pelosi out there to do it instead. I want you to weigh in on that, and then I got a question for you too from Denver over here on Rockfin. Denver said, where does the International Bank of Settlements weigh in on the new board? It was supreme under TPP. Does it have a role in China's vision or trajectory?
I'm sorry, the international ruling on what?
Let's see, what was it? Um, International Bank of Settlements.
Okay. I again the TPP right now when it comes to China, it's all theoretical. China is not a member of TPP. China,
Well,
the
well,
U.S. is not.
Trump
Yeah,
pulled out of it in 2017. So I
yeah,
mean, regardless, whatever it is, it's not in effect. I
yeah.
mean,
It's
there's no
U.S.
partnership
is not
between
part of it.
China.
China is not part of it.
There's
I mean,
China and
China
the U.S. are
applied for
not
membership.
partner. They're not partnered with this, but for some reason, there's a couple of people in our chat where this is like literally one of their most important issues. Where I'm honestly worried more about World War III because World War III, I think trumps any
Yeah,
trade deal because there's going
yeah.
to be no trading and there's going to actually be lives being literally lost and also possibly war between multiple nuclear parties. I mean, right now we literally got the China U.S. Taiwan situation. We have the U.S. Russia
Ukraine.
Ukraine situation. We have the Israel and Iran situation with the U.S. involved in that. I mean, so I'm looking, and then not to mention North Korea is also, in the background also doing a lot more tests. And then I just heard recently that North Korea is volunteering up to 100,000 troops to Ukraine to go and fight for Russia, and then
U.S. has
Iran
managed
has the drones
U.S.
in.
has managed to unite the most diverse coalition, from Russia to Iran to China to North Korea. These countries spread all across the Eurasian continent, have very different political ideologies, have very different domestic issues, but U.S. managed to unite them all into one coalition, all through U.S. foreign policy. So kudos to that.
Yeah,
And right now, your thing about Biden, I think is correct because officially on the surface, Biden protests that United States cannot, as head of the U.S. administration, he cannot control where the congressman or congresswoman may or may not want to go. But this is
mm-hmm.
false, patently false, because as I mentioned before, Pelosi did not travel on a private jet. She did not travel on a commercial airliner. She traveled on United States Air Force Boeing C-40C. So Biden is the commander in chief. All he could said is, sorry, you can't travel on U.S. Air Force asset. You have to take a commercial airline or a private jet like all other congressmen, right? The fact that and the fact that Pentagon provided fighter escort for Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, and they had the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan sailing through South China Sea all around Taiwan to offer support. That does not seem an individual decision by Pelosi. I mean, it's far from it. Far from like a isolated one crazy congresswoman's trip, unplanned.
Yeah, that's
trip.
why I don't believe it was Pelosi's sole doing.
Yeah, I mean, they have to make some kind of pretense, like, no, it's Biden. No, I really respect one China policy. It's just Pelosi's her own personal decision. Then why did she travel on U.S. Air Force jet? Why did the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy provided a freaking armed escort for her trip? I mean, so this is, Chinese is not buying that, of course. Chinese just think either Biden is lying or Biden is so weak that he has absolutely no control over the situation. I mean,
well, a combination of both. Politically, Biden is very weak right now, but Biden still has goals, which he's always. I mean, look at his career. Biden has always been a very hawkish type senator, and hawkish as a vice president. So it makes sense that he would follow that same logic now that he's supposedly the top man. And I don't see any of that changing, especially when you look at both sides of the aisle, the Democratic and Republican Party, both are more hawkish together combined than I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. And right now, at least when it comes to Russia, there's sort of a split where the Democrats are more gung-ho on going after Russia, whereas some Republicans are like, wait a minute, maybe this is not our issue to deal with. But on China, it's a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and the Republicans, they're trying to outdo each other to see who is tougher on China. We are tougher than these other guys. It's the other guys trying to sell out to China. And so right now we have this really weird political dynamic going on in United States. But if you really think about it, in terms of impacting average American lives, China doesn't really factor that. China doesn't really factor. I mean, what does China and Taiwan issue? How does that even factor to average Americans? Trying to make a living today. In the aftermath of pandemic and the great financial recession since 2008, which we never really recover from, right? But again, for politicians in a liberal democracy, it's always easier to shift blames, to blame the bad China than actually investing in our own infrastructure, investing in our own education, our own healthcare. So these are hard things to do. Yeah. It's not easier.
Somebody, I heard somebody in the chat. They said that, nobody ever says anything bad about China, and I'm like, do you see American media? I don't think there's anything positive, and it's not that it's about necessarily trying to be positive or pro. I mean, I don't have any affinity or love for most governments in most nations. I feel like I'm kind of isolated doing my own thing, and at the top they're all striving for as much power and control and hegemony, and this is all just like Game of Thrones, just depending on which side that you end up being on, which house you're part of. Had some interesting questions over here on the Rockfin side for you that I wanted to ask. Denver asked, was saying it's the bank at the Center of Finance in Switzerland. In World Economic Forum's vision, IBS has a larger role. So I guess they were asking, like, as far as the World Economic Forum and China, what do you feel? How do you feel China fits into the World Economic Forum's like mission statements and goals and things like that?
So China has, as I stated on my last appearance on your show, China definitely benefited from the globalization that has started since
Oh,
1980s.
yeah.
China is a benefactor. So China actually is perfectly fine with the system that even though it was a U.S. dominated, primarily U.S. dominated world system, but
Hmm.
because China is profiting from it, China was fine to have business as usual. It's U.S. that's growing increasingly alarmed because U.S. is feeling like somehow China is hijacking its own system, the system that was designed to perpetuate
Yes.
U.S. hegemony, and now U.S. is like, wait a minute, they hacked our system to work for them, and so they're trying to put a stop to that. This is what's going on right now. U.S. is trying to pull out all stops to help the rise of China, and they feel it feels as though they must do something right now because they feel there's have a limited time window of 10 years, about 10
Hmm.
years, because beyond the 10 years the Chinese economy would have reached the escaping velocity. It will be larger than the US economy, even if US in 2035 want to contain China, they would not be able to. Even if there's a will, there will be less capability. So that's why they're carrying out all these provocation regarding to Taiwan, because they felt like this is a time to do it. It's now or never, right? This
Oh,
is
yeah.
the thinking of the U.S. In military industrial complex. If we're gonna provoke China, if we're gonna start something, let's do it now rather than later when we will be in a weaker position. Now, from the China's
Hmm.
perspective, China time is on China's side. Every year China grows stronger. So
Yes.
there's less incentive to start some shit right now with US, which could jeopardize their projected economic rise, than
Hmm.
just wait 10 years, when
Yeah.
China is
Well,
automatically.
they could just literally let the U.S. just keep accruing more and more and more debt. And as you look at the political systems, they're starting to lose more and more legitimacy. You're having more. The third parties will start, eventually gaining power and start pushing out the major two parties, or at least giving them threats, throwing elections kind of out of their normal, it goes red, then goes blue, it goes red. It's going to start mixing things up. And if you look at America's policy that they've had since the beginning, it's about any nation which looks like it's going to break out of Western power hegemony. That nation needs to be stomped down and stopped. And so it doesn't matter if it's China, it doesn't matter if it's Russia, it doesn't matter. I mean, they did this with Japan. Japan's economy
Yes.
was flying, and at the trajectory was going. By now, it would be one of the major hegemonies, but
I
that was
remember.
stopped.
Yeah, I remember 1990, when I first came to United States. Like back then, there was a real fear of Japan. There was a song, there was a movie with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery, The Rising
Rising
Sun.
Sun, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about how Japanese coming over. They're gonna take over. They're gonna
Die
take our
Hard.
companies. They're gonna take our companies. They're gonna take our women. They're gonna take over.
Remember Die Hard, Nakatomi Plaza, Nakatomi Towers. I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean, like this is, and also the darker side is the story of Vincent Chen. Vincent Chen was had it was a Chinese American. She went to have her bachelor party, and she was confronted by two Detroit laid off Detroit auto workers. They had an argument, and later these two father and son pair hunted Vincent Chen down with a baseball bat. And during the court proceedings, they claim that they thought Vincent Chen is Japanese, and because the Japanese competition, Detroit Big Five, they suffer a lot, and had a lot run of layoff, and they got laid off. So that was their defense. That was their core defense. They thought Vincent Chen is Japanese, so he was a legitimate target for their anger for losing their jobs.
but the
And
crazy part is really it was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Act, shipping a lot of jobs to Canada and Mexico
Mexico,
more than
yeah.
anything. And so that hurt America far more than anything. And then, not to mention, American businessmen chose to go to China to try to exploit cheap labor. And
It goes,
so,
yeah, it goes back to what Lenin said, right? There was a capitalist, they will sell you the ropes to hand them with. And
yes,
Chinese position has always been, if you build it, they will come. They knew that. They built up their infrastructure, they built their ports, they built their power plants. They knew, these capitalist multinationals would rush in to take advantage of China's infrastructure, China's cheaper labor force, and that's exactly what happened. So when like all U.S. politicians are blaming China, none of them are actually blaming the capitalism and the capitalist system that's always driving towards the lowest cost, highest margin. That's pushing this phenomena. But
well, I would say that, I mean, just to give a little defense for some, there are some people in America who are pushing back against the capitalists as a whole and feel like capitalism is an unchecked problem which is wreaking havoc around the world. But yes, as a whole, the people who are at the top who are controlling most of the strings, yeah, they're letting capitalism run amok.
There are people in U.S. at grassroots level. They're starting to waking up, but the problem is our politicians. To be able to join either party, to function in that system, you have to buy in automatically into the system. It's like even like the so-called progressives, the squats nowadays. They all buy into the kind of the U.S. must be an empire, like kind of they sprout the same kind of rhetoric that supports U.S. foreign policy abroad, which is sustaining the U.S. hegemony around the world, sustaining the U.S. empire and the U.S.-led capitalist system. But yeah, that's going a little bit too far afield. Back to the Nancy Pelosi visit, I'm just glad that China actually handled it a lot more rationally than I would have. Everybody was expecting World War III breaking out.
Well, I completely had no belief that they were actually going to do anything.
I mean, like I didn't think World War III was going to break out, but I thought maybe China will at least send a fighter escort for Nancy Pelosi's planes into the Taiwan airspace. But that didn't even happen. They let her land peacefully. They let her leave. And then after she left, that's when China conducted this military exercise around Taiwan Island. It's actually, I think China actually played it brilliantly because without the Nancy Pelosi visit, if China just had carried out military exercise all around Taiwan Island, firing missiles, there will be like uproar in the international, in the Anglo media. People will be like, "Oh, China! Look at China, so aggressive!"
So in a way, Nancy Pelosi, are you saying that it's a possibility that Nancy Pelosi actually helped China be able to do this to encircle Taiwan to help corner the semi? Yeah, I mean, okay.
Yeah. American politicians play checkers. The Chinese leaders, they play chess. I mean, it's they play Go. So it's quite different. Like they're not even on the same playing field here. And for Pelosi, all her concern is to have this photo op to show American public and some of her voter base, like, look, I stand tough against authoritarianism in China. I'm so brave. I stood up to the bad CCP, and that's it. That's her concern. I mean, she doesn't really care about potential impact or fallout on the people.
Oh yeah, she just cares about getting her checks. That's
exactly. And but the Chinese, they plan ahead. I mean, they probably, like the military exercise, it takes months to prepare. So they probably had a contingency plan, once they heard about Nancy Pelosi's potential visit, because Nancy Pelosi had made this announcement I think last time we were on, like she was already talking about it, but she had to postpone it because supposedly she got COVID, and then and so China probably had this all planned out. They're just waiting for her visit.
I think they postponed it so it could play a little bit later into the the primary season.
Yes. I think that's right, because in U.S. is all election centric. That's all they care about, is about winning the election.
When you're basically like, okay, you got 2-year cycles for some of these people, and or say 4 years, and they're 2 years in already worrying about trying to run for the next election. Everything's election focused, and you look at I'm not sure how the tenor and feeling on how some of the COVID procedures were as far as the people in China and how they felt about them. But I know in America, though they might act as if, oh no, the people were perfectly happy with this stuff. I think Biden really took a lot of negative points for the way they handled things. And then you look at, there were a lot of things he didn't do that he said he was going to do on race things, on what is it, minimum wage, on some of the stuff he said he was going to do supporting unions. I mean, across the board, student cancellation of student loan debt. There was a lot of things internally that he just did not do, and I think now they're trying to do their best to try to, what can we do to, like, I believe that the Democratic Party was in cahoots with the Republican Party in overturning Roe versus Wade to make it an election issue. I completely believe that they're like, okay, well, let's let this happen, and then we can get our voters back.
They need a boogeyman, right? Before it was Trump.
Yes, they need a boogeyman.
Before they have very conveniently they have Trump, and now it's like, okay, you guys expect us to actually do something? Well, okay, look, Roe versus Wade, right? So
Putin's not working anymore. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, this is everything in U.S. is kind of from politics to economy. Everything is short-term thinking. Like you in politics, everything is revolving around this elections. Every 2 years. In like in the corporate world, everything is around the quarterly reports. That you have to make it good, so our stocks will continue to go up, so the stock market wouldn't be impacted. So everything is organized. So who cares what happens 5-10 years from now, right? Because by 5-10 years from now, these politicians will be out of the office, and these people might not be serving in the same position anymore. So,
well, I honestly think a lot of these people are going to lose positions. I think it's going to be, I think, well, even though my personal belief and feeling is, even though they switched from red to blue, this is ultimately still controlled by the major banking interests. I mean, in the U.S., we've had over 12 recessions and depressions. Every single one of them were caused by the banking industry, and that's not very often talked about. And if you look at who are the countries that we're always trying to invade and have wars or conflicts or sanctions on, it's all the countries which we do not have, federal banking system involved in.
And in a big recession or depression, guess who are the ones who actually get bailed out? The banks.
The banks. Exactly.
The banks. They're not bailing us out. The average American, we're not getting a bailout here. Mm-hmm. It's a big banks that's gonna get a bailout.
Which I was looking at some ties to, because in some of my other research I've done, looking into the Tang Dynasty and how the Bank of East Asia, how they're tied into the Tang Dynasty. And then I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. What is it? The Qing Dynasty? Qing.
Oh, Qing Dynasty.
Qing, okay. Yeah. I don't know why I thought the Qing Dynasty was spelled differently. But looking back to the Opium Wars, like I've heard you talk about multiple times, they were really pushing back hard against the West. And then at the fall of, the end of the Opium Wars and the fall of the Qing Dynasty, then you started seeing more Western influence banking coming out of Great Britain. Namely, one of them I found very interesting name, the Rothschilds. And then eventually the Rockefellers about 40 years after that. And so, I mean, going back into like 1890, 94, I believe.
Yeah, in fact, before the Opium War, the world's wealthiest private businessman was Chinese. So is a name named Ho Kwa. He was worth 5 times more than Nathan Rothschild in Britain. But after Opium War, of course, that all changed.
Mm-hmm. All the money
changed. Get sucked out of China, and that's where a lot of the British big British bank got their start. The HSBC. It stands for Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation. Right,
Mm-hmm.
they got their
Yes.
start in the opium trade, financing all these opium smugglers. But if you go to their corporate page, their history is all scrub, whitewash. They don't mention anything about their role in the opium trade anymore. But now they just HSBC. You probably a lot of few people even aware they're like old Hong Kong and Shanghai connection. That's where they made
Mm-hmm.
their first money.
Well,
The
I
first million.
tentatively knew about the banks being involved, but I didn't know which banks and which names. And like I run across this video from another channel that I follow, and he was laying out some of this information. Now I got a video dropping probably later on today. Just gotta make sure do a little bit of editing, which I'll make sure to send it over to you. I love to hear your thoughts on some of it. And we'll talk off camera, but just the curiosity of some of these things, and I know you're going to know more about this than myself, but yeah, it was interesting when I found out that bank, the Hong Kong bank was what goes back to the damn Rockefellers. I'm like, what the hell?
HSBC. I mean, like a lot of or Americans, they back then Standard Oil, they had a large
Yes,
stake
yes.
in China because they were selling kerosenes to marketing kerosene as fuel in China. They were and at that time these American and British banks are also financing railroads building in China. So the deal is they're forcing the Qing government to grant railroad concessions, and so these Western banks will finance the building of a railroad in China, and then these Western banks and their Western companies will retain the rights of operating and the revenue from the railroad for like 99 years, and then they. In addition to the railroad, also about 10 kilometers on the either side of the railroad will belong to that company or the bank. And so they literally carving up a whole swath of China during the late 19th century. Yeah, so that's how they operate. And like U.S. Navy actually had a Yangtze patrol. U.S. gunboats were patrolling up and down the Yangtze River, and its ostensible purpose is protect U.S. commercial interests, right? These are kind
Wow.
of commercial interests we're talking about, and they were there until 1950, until they finally got thrown out by Mao. So this is like a long historical perspective on kind of the U.S.-China relationship. The U.S. would much prefer the relationship to go back before like pre-communist time when U.S. corporation dominated the Chinese commercial landscape, and the fact that it's that's not happening today. That's the real sore point for these U.S. corporations.
Well, speaking of U.S. corporations and Western corporations, I got another question I want to run by you. It says, is the Bund in Shanghai associated with Western banks?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like the whole the so what happened is after the Second Opium War, Shanghai was marked as one of the treaty ports, and lot of part of Shanghai are carved out as foreign concessions. So there was American concession and British concession and the French concession and the Japanese concession, and the British and American concession were combined into one. They were called international settlements. So all the buildings, old buildings along the Bang, they were built by these foreign capitalists, foreign banks, and this a lot of them financed by the opium opium dealers, and
Mhm.
in Shanghai you ended up with all these much of the Shanghai became foreign concessions with a Chinese area. So Shanghai had a Chinatown essentially.
Mm.
Shanghai had a Chinatown, and the rest of the area are these foreign concessions, and they have restrictions on where Chinese can go. Like
It kind of sounds similar to how Hong Kong used to be.
yes. Hong Kong is just outright colony. Yes, that's because in those international concessions, the Chinese law didn't apply. It was the law was administered by the British and the Americans. They, British actually they brought the Sikhs from India to access police in their international settlements. So this is a
That's
lot of
odd.
people describe this period of China as like a semi-colonial because it's not a full colony, but it's already halfway there. In places like
Well,
Shanghai, definitely.
and then this is going to be sad that this is my reference point, but hey, people don't judge me out there. Most of mine back in the day, because my uncle was really big on kung fu flicks, and he would go to spend some time, after Vietnam and stuff like that, and that brought him deeper into just Asian culture as a whole, whether it was Chinese, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laos, Thai, the litany. And so he's always kind of had an affinity more for Asian culture more than anything. And so, long story short or short story long, the watching a lot of those movies is when I started to see a lot of the kind of the cultural clash between ancient China and the westernized coming in, and like with the Japan imperial army, how they were forcing a lot of things, and you saw a lot of Chinese are not permitted to go here. If you are Chinese and you come here, you need to be dressed a certain way. It kind of remind me a lot of what they did with the Native Americans, how they start making them cut their hair or wear suits and all kind of different things like that, in forms of colonialism. And it was interesting how I just kind of thought it was movie stuff for the because we're talking 70s and 80s. I was much younger then, but as I got older, I realized no, that was the reason why it was such a theme in so many of these movies, because it was a real reference points to what was going on in that time period. Because a lot of those movies are dating back to the 30s and 40s and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially like a lot of the Bruce Lee films people might be familiar with, like there was a
Chinese
famous scene.
Connection.
There was a famous scene where Bruce Lee went to Shanghai and he saw the sign that hanging outside the park says
Yeah, he breaks the
no
sign.
dogs, no Chinese, and he got
Mm-hmm.
mad and he jumped up and did a flying kicks through the sign. So that's like a famous scene in the movie. So people actually did a research to see if the sign actually existed in history. So what they find is they didn't in the old Shanghai, colonial Shanghai, they didn't explicitly say no dogs, no Chinese, but there was a sign says this area is reserved for the Europeans, and
Mm.
also don't bring your dogs in here.
Well,
So
it's
so
kind of like in America in the South, you had some what they call sundown towns. Well, some where there was an explicit law literally on the books, and some you just knew after
yeah,
dark. So I
yeah,
mean, it's kind of interesting
yeah.
correlation how they do these things.
Yeah, it just play on words because the old sign actually says this area is reserved for Europeans and also says no dogs. I mean, it's pretty
Wow.
much, yeah. So this I really have to go because
Yeah,
my
yeah, I know. I saw it got a little bit later than we planned, and I know I don't want to get you in trouble with the missus, so I can have you back again. Um, Carl, can you let everybody know? I believe I put it in the chat, but I'm not sure. But just let everybody know anyway where they can find you, your channel, your podcasts, your Twitter, all those things, real quick.
Sure. I have a channel on YouTube, so just my name, Carl Zha. Search for it. I put a lot of my free content from my podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, on my YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter. Again, my handle is just Carl Zha, the Carl spelled with a C. And for other people more interested into deep dives into Chinese history, I do have a podcast called the Silk and Steel Podcast, which is hosted on the Patreon. I just go to Patreon page, search Silk. The first podcast is my Silk and Steel podcast, where recently I have I'm doing a couple of series. One on chronological retelling of Chinese history from the beginning. Another one is a comprehensive dive into the Chinese Civil War, starting from the Manchurian campaign. and then just whatever that catch my interest about China history, culture, and politics.
Did you ever get that worked out with that co-host you were talking about for you guys to both work on that? Because I haven't. I have to admit, I haven't been over to check out your work in a minute, because you know how I get as a content creator, gets busy, and I run 3 channels myself. So I definitely want to get you on, so we're not just talking about current politics. I want to get you to break down some history for us also, because I think that it's definitely needed over here in the West. And I'll just zip my mouth and just let you go. So I thank you so much for being on here. Make sure give my best to your family, and give a hug to the little guy.
Thank you for inviting me. Anytime, give me a shout out. I love to talk.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely hit you up. I'll make sure that it won't be this long of a difference, and probably maybe have you sometime before the end of the month, because I got the feeling that there's going to be some more stuff that we're going to need to talk about.
There's always something.
But all right, I want to try to get you on with some of the guests from Africa, so we can talk some of the China, Africa stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna try to coordinate that with you offline. And for you guys out in the chat, look forward to that, in the next couple of weeks or so, or next month or whatever. But it's coming.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I look forward to that.
All right. Well, cool. Thank you so much,
Marcus. Adios.
All righty, brother. Have a good one. And you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry I went live a little earlier than planned. I actually told Carl that 10 o'clock, but I forgot that I scheduled it at 10:30, and he had a hard deadline. He had some things planned, which he's going to. So that was on me. But I thank you all for joining. Even if you guys don't necessarily agree with everything that's put out. I did ask the question about TPP. If you guys don't accept his answers or his response, I don't know what else to do with that. I can't. This isn't about forcing somebody to your ideology or your beliefs. And I think we need to learn how to just accept other people's answers and responses. So, and also there's issues which, frankly, I care far more about than worrying about a deal which is basically not even really operable. So I'm more worried about war than anything. So that's what my focus is. I'll let you guys worry about what China's doing with TPP, and you guys can knock yourselves out on it. I'm not that worried about it. Let's see, Tiananmen Tanky, if you're not a troll, because I'm confused at this point, because the people who troll me, they make so many different accounts. But if you are an actual real person, it is person propaganda live. He's the one doing majority of this. Steven says China is sanctioning sand against Taiwan, which you need to make. I believe Taiwan is a part of China, so I'm not necessarily worried about if they are trying to do deals with another nation, basically behind their nation's back. That's a problem. So I'm not necessarily so worried about if China is sanctioning Taiwan, who Taiwan is trying to literally work with an enemy who is trying to, basically subvert that nation's wishes. So, I mean, what do you think the U.S. would do if Puerto Rico decided that they're going to start directly helping Russia? It's not going to be good. So, I mean, I just don't understand what it appears to be almost a double standard on going so hard against China when there are so many other nations out there which are doing a lot of the same stuff, if not worse. So I would just like to see consistency and going after all of these nations instead of focusing on one nation in general. So that said, I want to give a shout out to my friends I saw in the chat. Much love to you, Yona. Who else? Atres. And I think that's pretty much it on the YouTube side. Oh, Warren, I see Warren is in here or was in here. I'm not sure. I'm about to wrap it up shortly. And I want to give definite shout out to Denver over there on the Rock Fins. Um, I actually, what was it? There was something that Denver said up there, and I wanted to respond. Uh, yes, I wish I spoke Mandarin also. Mandarin or I just wish I spoke a lot of languages, but only so much time to try to learn all these different things. But what was it? Where was or what were you saying, Denver? Looking for it. That way I can answer that one question. Yes, COVID does show a certain level of lockstep. Why does China sell weapons to Saudi Arabia? Why does any nation sell weapons to any nation? For money. It's pretty clear why they do that. Where is it at? I think you were saying something, Denver, as far as the WEF, and they're basically all kind of on board together. A lot of people hold that position. I somewhat hold that position. I would say that, LOL, no, I'm real. No, not propaganda, propaganda. That is a content creator who just keeps spawning more and more and more accounts because they're obsessed with the issue of China and TPP. But and I guess you could possibly ask them why TPP and China is their main subject. I don't know. What are they even talking about with this sand stuff? What it is from what I'm gathering is it seems like some people on the left are beefing with other people on the left, and I guess the so-called the Caleb Maupins and the people who I guess communists. I don't even understand all the whole ideology and the ins and out, but apparently by me talking to Carl Zha, I guess that they have some kind of issue with him. So I don't really even understand their whole dynamic and what the beefing and feuding is about. It's like I tell people often, I'm looking at global politics as far as mostly national defense. I tend to not really spend a lot of time getting in depth in the weeds and other nations' internal policies, especially since China is one of those nations where there's no possible way for us to be able to know good or bad exactly what's going on in China because it is such a the information is so guarded, and a lot of their media is state TV. It's just the same thing what you get in regions of Africa and all kind of other places. So I don't feel like there is enough direct, solid information for me to be able to view this or view that and make all these hard decrees or on what I think is going on in there. And my thing is I'll ask somebody what they believe is going on, what they see is going on there, and all we can do is leave that out there for you all in the audience to kind of take your cues and your opinions and however you take the information. I trust me, I am not at night sitting up there losing any sleep on what's going on in China. But apparently some of these people are, since they've been trolling me for months and months and months about this. So I think I answered most of the questions. Let's see. Uma has something. Let's see what you have here. I guess I figure I can answer this before I get ready to close out. Let's see, what are you saying here, Uma? Hold on a second. I'm just translating it real quick. So yes, if you guys are wondering, like, what am I doing? Why am I not talking? Okay, so Uma says, and of course, if Russia does not focus on war, declare war on its own, the Chinese Communist Party will also use the chaos of the conflict to turn Russia into the villain of the world for its own benefit. I feel it's the West and the US which is doing that. I think that if if let's say a Yeltsin was still in power and Russia was more subservient to the US, then I feel China would not feel as confident to push back against the West or the US. I feel because there's a rift between Russia and the West, I feel it emboldens every other nation who has a gripe against the US and the West as a whole. So, though people look at it and they think many people, and this is where I disagree with a lot of people on the left, they believe that every one of these nations are all on board together for this whole coordinated Great Reset, World Economic Forum. I don't agree with that, but it's perfectly fine for me to have my opinion and them to have their opinion. Tiananmen Tanky says we want more Carl Zha. Well, we will have more Carl Zha. Carl had a hard exit. He had to leave on, so he has some personal things which he's handling. So I'll make sure to have him back on. I promise. What else? Let's see. Uma has one other thing out. Since I often don't get to Uma's comments, it's normally hard when the chat is moving kind of fast and I'm talking at the same time. So got a little bit of time here to translate. So I will put this in and see. Says, and if Russia uses peace and restores human justice, the Chinese Communist Party will also go silent as it wants to destroy evidence of its own corruption involving people in Russia. I don't disagree there. But like I've said before, I believe every major government is corrupt. I don't believe it's possible to have a major government without them being corrupt or without them being corrupted. I just feel the corruption goes much higher than focusing on individual nation. Tiananmen Tanky, he is so smart and actually knows a lot about TPP deal, China join, has nothing to do with the USA. Yeah, well, tell that to a lot of these Americans in here and then the Canadian who they have a big deal with it. I mean, when you literally look up TPP, it literally says the US left the deal. So if the US left the deal, then how is the US in the deal with China? That doesn't make sense. And then you have the what is the other one called? It was like the TTIP. It says that China has applied. It doesn't even say that they've been given any kind of agreed on. So I mean, I don't see this information which they're talking about. I mean, but I at the same time, it doesn't mean that much to me because whether they have a TPP deal or China deal, I have no clue. There's no way I can confirm what is going on inside of China, how it's affecting people as a whole or not as a whole. But apparently, a lot of the people, a lot of these trolls in here, which is the same person, believes that it has to be negative on the people there, and that's why they apparently care so much about it. So I don't get it. I mean, I really wish I knew why the issue is so important to this group of people. I mean, there are so many pressing issues in the U.S. which get virtually no attention. I mean, I just saw a video about human trafficking. Now I guess this is old, but they found something like 7,000 male penises, which came out of Africa that are being human trafficked into China. Uh, I was like, okay, so what's going on with this human trafficking thing that's going on coming out of Africa? But that doesn't concern. I mean, I think about all over the U.S. You have women that are literally sex trafficked all over the place, and but TPP is the big deal for these people. So I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't think I ever will get it either. Denver says TPP was a means to an end. COVID and WHO are now giving them. It was lockstep essentially for corporate dominance. Yeah, in which I feel, I mean, and I would agree with that. I think all of these things are all happening at the corporation level, at the tops of the corporation level, and to key in on each individual nation, there's just so much that are going on. I mean, I could drive you around, which I'm probably going to do it soon, get my GoPro out and just ride around the streets of LA and show the massive homelessness which is going on all over the city and how sad it is. I mean, we just had a woman who flew through a stoplight, going. I don't know how fast she was going. It looked like she was going easily 80, 90 miles an hour. No brakes, no slow. It just plowed into like 4 or 5 cars, and you see people burst into flames. We have massive flooding, which is going on all throughout the country. And there's just gazillions of different issues, but this group of people, for some reason, is obsessed with China and TPP. So I don't know. Tiananmen Tanky says China has corporations that are accountable to the people. I learned that from Carl Zha. I don't know that. I can't confirm or deny. It's just because I'm not in China. I've never been to China. I have no clue what's going on inside of China. I get that you approach more subjects and content, but you bombard me with this one topic over and over and over and over and over. I talk about 99% of the stuff I talk about has nothing to do with any of this. But for some reason, you are obsessed with this topic. I do not get it at all. I would get if I was somebody who was out there defending TPP or saying that it's the greatest thing that ever lived, and China's this, and I'm not doing any of that. I do not understand what your angle is or why you're obsessed. I feel like maybe do this to Caleb Maupin or whatever that one guy's name you guys said, Maz or Taz or somebody. I don't even know these people who you guys are talking about who are pushing these issues. I feel like go harass these people who promote these issues and who are really in the trenches on this. I let people know this is not my wheelhouse, TPP. So I think that is about it. Steven says, we talk about issues you refuse to address the topics honestly. I don't. I have not sat there and studied and talked to a bunch of people in China. I don't feel asking just a bunch of Americans their viewpoint on TPP constitutes actually addressing it honestly. I feel that there's no possible way for me to know exactly what's going on in China. So I don't feel like that's a fair statement. Are you telling me that there's a fair and honest outlet that is talking about internal politics in China, which is impartial, saying both sides of the issue? If you're telling me that, then I know you're dishonest. I talk about the issues that I have familiarity with, which I understand and which I feel are pressing. everybody talks about the issues that they need to. Everybody's not an expert on every issue. So I don't get why you expect me to do an impersonation of whatever you guys do or are into. Uma says, in fact, people have had to deal with natural disasters since prehistoric times, but what prevents people from fighting natural disasters like before? Because too many additives, like the case of COVID, occur in this era. Yeah, I mean, there's we could talk about the stuff that's in our foods. We could talk about microplastics. We could talk about so much stuff. Yeah. Replying to Stephen Torres, we talk about that ain't so many. Yeah, I don't, and yeah, thank you, Denver. I mean, I try to do my best with the information which I know and talk about what I know. Cool, you're fine. Well, since you are my 11 view, actually, Tiananmen Tanky, if that's not you, I've been mostly trying to talk to them and talk to Denver and talk to the people who actually do care about what I have to say. I study the issues which I am focused on. Uh, I'm not studying TPP. In fact, tell me how, even if China and TPP is completely in effect, how does that affect me in the US? Oh, you are a new viewer. Oh, okay, cool. Well, yeah, on this channel, I just like to do interviews and talk to people. Um, and I try to be very interactive with my chat as much as possible. I feel like talking to the chat actually helps me get well, when it's being genuine, I feel like it's very helpful to the discussion. Um, Demon 1800s as casualties of capitalism, like indoctrination to lack empathy. China exploits their people, like Uncle Sam. Where'd that go? Capitalism is the enigma. Money is fake. Yeah, I like I've said before. I don't have an allegiance to any government. I'm not prepping for any government. I don't really. I'm not a capitalist. I am not a Marxist, a communist. Nothing. I'm apolitical. I'm really don't. I feel the system is doing what it's going to do, and I don't feel like I make any impact on that system. Therefore, I don't spend the time like some other people feeling like I need to try to fight it. A lot of people, a lot of these different people may be secular and have their views. I'm not a secular person. I mean, well, I'm a secular as far as this commentary, but my beliefs tend to my faith, and that's where I put most of my energy. I don't put most of my energy into believing that I can fight this system. Unlucky Taco. Marcus, I don't think people want you to be anything but the person who is asking questions of a guest. I have asked the questions of the guest, but that's not enough for some of these people. I literally asked the question which they asked. The guest gave an answer. They didn't like that answer. They wanted me to ask the question again, and ask the question again, and ask the question again, and then rephrase it and ask it again. At that point, I don't feel you're asking a question. I feel you're trying to get a person to submit to whatever your beliefs is on that subject. And I feel that's what is coming out of those two. Okay, so Denver says, not that I prescribe to the view, but if TPP were in effect, any legal challenges in independent state would be statehood would be over. Any tort legal action would be ended or sent to arbitration, not actual court. Let me pull this up. What I just TPP real quick. 2017 withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, was the first day action for Donald Trump. Did Biden go open TPP back up? I don't remember him doing that. Hold on, I'll look that up real quick. Let's see. It says U.S. President Joe Biden has said he does not support rejoining the TPP as it stands, but that he could try to renegotiate it to include stronger labor. What does it say? And this is from the Council of Foreign Relations. TPP was, that's a past tense word, a massive trade deal agreement signed by 12 Pacific Rim countries, including the United States, that together comprise 40% of the global economy. While many experts say that TPP had economic strategic benefits, it drew attacks from across the U.S. political spectrum. President Trump withdrew from the deal on his first day of office. The 11 other TPP countries have moved forward with a slightly modified agreement and have left the door open for the United States to rejoin. So the U.S. is not involved in this TPP, as people in here keep saying over and over and over. But in the end, I'm going to leave it there. You guys can keep focusing on the TPP. I don't really care. Yes, the TPP is a secret deal. I lie about the TPP. I don't know, unless you guys think I'm supposed to make up stuff. This is what it says right here. You see this? What's next for the TPP partnership? Because it ended. Whatever. I spent, and this is the last time that I will be bringing up anything with any TPP in it. Because I don't care, honestly. That said, you all who are not, yes, of course I'm reading mainstream media. Am I supposed to read who? Who am I supposed to read who's an authority on it? Propaganda? Because propaganda has $1 million staff who goes in and sits in these meetings. Yeah, whatever. Guys, have a good one. For those who are actually listening, which keep it up with the propaganda army. I'm glad that you're telling people and letting them know that you are literally trolling an account. So hopefully they'll just shut down your YouTube channel since you are harassing. Hopefully that's what happens. Read WikiLeaks. Yeah, okay, I don't care. And to those over on Rockfin, you guys have a good one. Talk to you all later.